Hi, everyone. Welcome to our May Wireside Chat. I'm Paul Whitcover, the Dean of the Online MFA, and I'm joined, as I usually am, by Melissa Hart, who is an instructor in the Online MFA. And our special guest tonight is Amber Logan, who is also an instructor in MFA. We're really thrilled to have her tonight, and I'm going to introduce her now. Dr. Amber Logan is an author of speculative novels and short fiction. She lives in Kansas. Her debut novel, The Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn, is an adult retelling of the children's classic, The Secret Garden, set near Kyoto, Japan. She earned a PhD in creative writing from Anglia Ruskin. I always want to say Angela whenever I see that. I don't know why. Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, in the UK, where her thesis examined the intersection of fairy tales, Haruki Murakami, and techno-animism, which we will be talking a bit about later tonight. Dr. Logan also holds an MA in International Relations, a Master of Liberal Arts degree, and a BA in psychology. She has been teaching online university courses since 2009. So Amber, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very excited. So I hardly know even where to begin, but I guess I want to just ask about your writer's journey. How did you get to this point? Where did it all start?
Well, I started off actually writing poetry, which is interesting, and just being obsessed with words and kind of wordplay. And I never thought that I would write a novel. I didn't think I had the patience for it. So when I was like in middle school, I would write poetry. I would write like weird little like anecdotes of stories. And I was also obsessed with quotes. I would check out these books of quotes from the library and I would sit on my bed with a blank notebook and I would just copy down any quote that like caught my fancy. I wouldn't even write down who said it. It was just the words that I was interested in. And if the words just made me feel something, I would write them down.
So do you still have all those quotes in your memory? Do they spring to mind at appropriate moments?
Only very rarely and only very strange ones. I actually have a terrible memory, which I think is why I like to write them down so much, because I felt like unless I wrote them down, they would disappear forever or something. I'm not sure.
So
But
you kept like Bartlett's familiar quotations on your bedside table?
basically, yes. Yeah, well, I had
That's great.
a rotating variety of them from the library because I never owned any for some reason. You'd think I would like ask for one for Christmas and have a highlighter, but no, I checked them out and hand wrote them into a notebook for some reason. Yeah, so I've long been interested just in like the written word and how it makes you feel and how it looks on the page and how it sounds out loud. Um, but yeah, it wasn't until 2015, actually, so about 10 years ago now, I realized that I wrote my first novel, and it was because I had an idea for a short story. And once I started getting into it, I was like, uh-oh, this is far too long for a short story. And so it kind of expanded. And then when I sat down, I was like, I need to outline this. And I outlined it, and it turned out to be a novel length. And it was actually a YA novel. And I wrote it. I sent it to like my writers group because I'd started being in a writers group around that time as well. And I ended up polishing it. I ended up querying it and it went nowhere. But it was a really good learning experience for sure. And while I was writing that, though, I was a little bit afraid that that was the only book I would ever write. I thought I had this one idea for a novel. It's the first one I've ever had, and that's it. This is my shot. But then partway through, I actually did come up with another idea for a novel, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can do this again. And so I did end up writing that book as well, which was actually my first retelling. And it was a retelling of what turned out to be actually a fake Irish folktale, where there's kind of an interesting story behind that called The Soul Cages. And I say it's a fake folktale because when I started to dig into the origins of the story a little bit more, I found out that the man who had collected the stories to put them into like this anthology of Irish folktales had kind of just made that one up and like snuck it in there. But it made me, but of course I think this was in like the late 1890s anyways. And I was like, well, who's to say that's not as valid as any other folktales? Because he had based it loosely like on a couple of other folktales and like just kind of cobbled things together because he needed one more for his collection type thing. But that, I think, also kind of got me started in thinking. It's like, well, who gets to decide when something is officially a folktale, or who gets to decide that this is a fairy tale and not just a silly story that somebody wrote? So I think that was really the beginning of my interest in retellings and fairy tales and folk tales, broadly speaking. And it was a story that, originally was set in Ireland, and I set it in Japan. So that was also my first story where I was like, oh, I'm going to try the setting that I'm familiar with and just completely mix up the original setting and see what that does to the story. Um, and so I did try querying that book as well. And eventually I did get a agent offer for that story. And that was with a British agent. For some reason, so at this full disclosure, at this point, I've had 3 different literary agents, and they've all been in the UK. Somewhat coincidentally, I have queried widely each time, but for some reason, I am loved by the UK and not as much by the US. I don't know why. But so I became an agent and author then with North Bank Talent Management. And right when I was getting ready to go out on submission, sending it out to editors with the agent, my agent left the agency, and I was told, it's okay. We will hook you up with the next agent who comes online. They said, we're going to hire a replacement and we'll just match you 2 up. And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. So at that point, I got my second agent who, again, she was just kind of brought on board, had no idea who I was. I had no idea who she was, but we're like, hey, we'll make the best of this. We will work together. And she ended up being lovely. And she actually did sell my next book, because the book, the fake fairy tale retelling, actually did not end up selling. And so that died on sub, as people say. But then the next book was my Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn. And that is the book that's a retelling of the Secret Garden. And that's the one that finally I did get an offer on. And that was sold by my second agent. So that's how I got to that stage.
That's appropriate because the law of 3 is such an important thing in fairy tales, right? So
this is true.
So let me ask you about, so you wrote your first book and the YA, and you had it out, submitting it. Nothing came of that. You wrote your second book, got an agent, had that out, and it kind of withered on the vine. What kept you going in the face of that kind of discouragement? Because that must be discouraging. It is for me. What has happened to me? So what gave you the fortitude to continue writing?
Well, my advice to everybody is always be working on the next thing, because that is how it worked. By the time that my first book that I'd written, I felt like those queries were kind of drying up. I was already ready to query with the next book. So I just kind of flipped my brain and thought, okay, that one's shelved for now, but now I'm getting really excited because I'm about to go out on submission again with this brand new project, which has, all the doors are open still. So that has always been my approach. So I actually wrote down a timeline of all the different books that I've written, and I've noticed how much they've overlapped, because even before I finished writing one, I've often started on the next one. So like if I shelve a book to be like, okay, I finish a first draft, I'm going to put it aside for a month, to get fresh eyes on it. During that month, I'm usually starting to write the next one. So I just have this constant next book, next book, next book,
Yeah.
next book, so that I never feel like I am just dead in the water with nothing in my hands. There's always the next exciting, shiny thing that I am wrapping up and ready to go out into the world with. And it really maintains that enthusiasm. And that has really worked for me.
Kind of like Tarzan swinging through the jungle, right? You always have to be reaching out for that next vine.
Exactly.
I'm going to read a question in the chat, which I think is a really good one. Is there anything you wish you'd known about the submission process that you know now? And then in parentheses, it's great to meet another author who writes fairy tale retellings. My thesis is a Sleeping Beauty Rapunzel retelling in a post-apocalyptic fantasy.
Nice.
That sounds great.
That sounds very cool. So about the submission process, well, again, by all means, be working on the next thing. And also be sure, if you are working with an agent, which people often are at that stage, unless you're submitting to small presses on your own, which I also do have experience with, and I can talk about that as well. You want to have a very clear communication about what kind of feedback you want regarding the submissions and what kind of feedback you don't want. I'm the type of person who wants to have as much information as possible. So I've always told my agents, tell me every rejection. I want to see the words that they use to turn me down. I want to know exactly when it happens. I want to know if somebody's ghosting you, because that is also information. And so I got into a habit. I would set up with my agent every Friday. They would send me an update and they're like, well, I haven't heard from anybody this week, or, oh, I heard from this one person. Here's what they said. And I've also been very involved in the submissions process. Like, I research editors myself. I research imprints. And I've come up with lists that I'm like, hey, I don't see any of these on the list. Could we send it to these people as well? And my agents have always been very amenable to that. So, but of course, this is not for everybody. Some folks will be like, I only want to know if I have a book deal, and I want dead silence otherwise, so I don't have to think about it. I'm going to pretend I'm not on sub so I can just be working on my next project. So if that works for you too, then communicate that. But it really is about making sure you have the information that you want so that you can be in a good headspace, because it is very stressful and it can last a very long time. With my first book, I actually just looked this up. I went out on sub. Sorry, I made a cheat sheet here. I went out on sub with that one in 2020. And then, yeah, it wasn't until late 2021 that I actually got the book deal. So I'm pretty sure it was over a year of being on sub before I finally sold to, and it was a relatively small press. So we'd been through several rounds of submissions with editors as well.
And what did you do to research, like, the agent or agency that you wound up going with ultimately? How did you decide where you were going to query?
Well, my first stop is always just Query Tracker, which is an excellent website that they have a free version, which is perfectly serviceable, particularly if you only have one project out. If you start having multiple projects out in the world, you want to go with the paid subscription, which is still only like 25, 30 bucks a year. So it's very affordable. And that is a good way to search, to come up with names of agents and agencies, because you can search by genre and it'll give you all the folks who rep that genre. But then from there, yeah, you kind of need to individually go into agency or publisher websites. There's also Publishers Marketplace, which is quite nice. That is notably more expensive. I believe that is $25 a month. But of course, you can always just get it just for a month, do a whole bunch of research. And I know that they also recently have started like a 1-day quick shot research package where I think it's $10 for one device, and it's like a 24-hour thing. So if you're just like, I have 5 people I want to look up, I'm going to pay my $10, look them up, and then you only paid $10 for it. But that is a great tool because it actually shows you the deals that have been made by agents and editors. Although a caveat, which I discovered, it is primarily US based. So like my UK editor agent, actually, but all 3 of them have very little represented on Publishers Marketplace because the UK uses the bookseller. They have like a different publication where they announce their sales. So just because a UK agent doesn't seem to have a lot of sales on Publishers Marketplace does not necessarily mean that they are new or they don't make a lot of sales. So, but generally speaking, those Query Tracker and Query Manager are like the best tools for getting you started.
Yeah, Melissa put in the link to manuscript wish list as well, which I think is another good site.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of the manuscript wish lists for individual agents are linked to from their Query Tracker page, which is really helpful. You can just click and open it up and you're like, oh, here we are. So
yeah. And another tip is look at the writers that you like and figure out who their agent is. Sometimes they'll thank their agent in their book. But usually if you just do a web search, you can find out who a particular writer's agent is, and then you can see who their agency is. You might not get that same writer or that same agent, but there might be junior agents at that agency that are looking for new people. So yeah, a lot of options out there to get an agent. And I think it is, especially if you want to traditionally publish, very useful to have an agent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, jumping in, Paul.
Go ahead, jump.
I'm just jumping to ask Leanna's question. How do you best handle writer's block and or moments of creative doubt?
Good question. So I would say I don't really experience a traditional kind of writer's block. And I think that is because I am very much a plotter. So by the time I am sitting down to actually type words into my manuscript, I know what is going to be in that section. I use Scrivener, which I'm a huge Scrivener fan. And so it's a program where I can have like my blank page set up, and then I can have little virtual note cards that are my notes of everything that's going to be in each scene. So I will have a full paragraph of what's going to be in the individual scene when I sit down to write. And so in my brain, I'm like, I don't have to come up with something. I'm just filling in the details of this outline I've already provided. And it can be terrible. I mean, I don't mind. My first drafts are very, very messy. And I have a lot of either comments off to the side where it's like, revisit this, this doesn't make sense. Or I'll do brackets, insert funny line here, end brackets. And that is totally fine because I am just trying to get words on the page. So in that regard, yeah, my standards are so low that I don't have writer's block because I'm not afraid of what it's going to turn into. But as far as the moments of creative doubt, I definitely do have those. There will be times where even if I'm in the middle of a book that I've already, outlined extensively, if I'm just like, I'm not sure this is overall going the way I need it to go, I have a specific notebook that I pull out with pen and paper, which I think is important to switch from a digital format to kind of a manual handwritten format, where I will write out my doubts. I will brainstorm. I will say something about this isn't feeling right, and I'm trying to, pinpoint what it is. And then often I will go for a walk, or I will take a shower, or I'll do going to the sauna for some reason. Anytime where I could just have to have nothing going on in my brain except letting it, kind of ruminate on ideas. And then often by the time I come back from that experience, I will have some kind of direction. And often it's not even an idea. It's a, you know what? I don't even need that entire character in this book. And it'll be something that's completely way over here. I never would have considered if I just sat there and kept kind of forcing myself through it. So short breaks, handwriting, brainstorming, come back to it later with a fresh perspective. Let your brain do the work while you're off doing the dishes. That seems to work for me.
I mean, what's great about that is that you mentioned that you outline extensively, but it doesn't sound as though you are yoked to that outline. You're willing to go in a different direction if the story dictates it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I have been known too to have like a really good outline up to about the 50% mark, and then have very loose outline after that, and then have like a pretty strong ending maybe. But because I know that as I'm going through the first half, there's going to be changes that might impact what that, that midpoint moment is going to look like. So, but as I get closer to it, I then flesh it out more. So I'm never in a scene where I have very little outline. I always at least one scene fully outlined ahead of myself, just for that writer's block reason. So I'm sitting down, it's like, my job is to fill in the blanks, and that's all I have to do in that writing session.
So will you like go in and flesh out a scene in your outline prior to writing that scene, or do you have it already set up far in advance?
I try to have it set up as far in advance as I can, but it depends on how quickly I'm trying to write the project, or how quickly I've had to outline the project too. Sometimes I have outlined a project and I have really basic information, and for whatever reason, I'm like, I am just raring to go on this. And I'm like, who am I to argue? So I dive in a little bit earlier than I would have otherwise. But each time it's a little different. I think that's another thing that I've learned is like every book I write, it's going to be a little bit different. It serves the needs of that particular book and that my time of life and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I remember after I finished my first novel, I thought, well, this isn't so hard. I understand how to do it now. And then I had like a 5-year, span of trying to write my second novel because it wasn't the same. I didn't know how to do it. I hadn't learned anything.
Each book is different. Every single book is going to have different needs, and yeah, you will probably approach it a little bit differently.
I'm dying to ask the question. Oh, Paul, I can't wait anymore.
No, go ahead.
Amber, I know The Secret Garden inside and out,
Oh,
and all
yay.
the illustrations too. How did you retell it? What did you do?
Well, it's interesting. So I started out actually just thinking that I wanted to do a story where there was a character who was kind of a fish out of water. And I thought, I want a character, and I knew I wanted to set it in Japan. So I was like, okay, I want a story of somebody who's not entirely familiar with Japan, but maybe a little bit familiar, gets kind of plumped down into Japan and has to deal with something. And then I kind of overlaid that. I said, okay, well, what are some like classic stories or fairy tales or folk tales that could kind of fill that niche? And I ended up thinking of The Secret Garden, and I was like, I don't think I've ever even seen a retelling of The Secret Garden. At the time, I had never read one, and there's very few out there, even today. And so I thought, well, wait. So Mary Lennox, it's a children's book, so she is a child, but she is a recent orphan, and she is sent back home to England, even though she's, from India because she's born to expats in India. And so I thought, okay, well, what if I have my character's name is Mari, and she was actually born in Japan to expats in Japan. And then she returned to the US when her parents divorced, but now as an adult, she's going back to Japan. And she finds herself in this old Japanese ryokan, so like an old traditional inn that has these gardens that have been kind of abandoned and gone to seed. And she has to slowly kind of revive them as part of her healing process because her mother recently passed away, so she became an orphan very recently as an adult. And so it's a lot about the grief that I kind of felt was missing from the original Secret Garden because it is a children's story and you're not going to go super, hard into the grief element. But that was something I wanted to do. I wanted to go real hard into the grief, and I wanted to make it a little bit creepy because when I was a kid and I would read The Secret Garden or I watched the old movie, I was always a little bit disappointed every single time that there wasn't actually a ghost. I was like, oh, and it's her cousin again. Maybe this time I wanted there to be a ghost. And so I thought, well, in my adult version where I can go a little dark and I can go a little creepy and I can really get into the grief, I was like, I'm going to have some ghostly stuff actually happening in there. And that's part of the mystery that comes about in the story. So that was a lot of fun to think about all the different little elements that I could change because there's it's a robin in the original one that leads her to the garden. In this one, it's a Japanese red-crowned crane who she sees flying and she chases and she sees where it lands. And so I have a lot of little nods and Easter eggs to the original story in there. And I've had folks who are big fans of the original come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I loved every time I recognized it." But then I've had a lot of people who are like, "I've never read The Secret Garden and I loved it, and now I'm going to go read The Secret Garden." And I'm like, "Yay!" Because I love that kind of the conversation that the original text has with the retelling. That's part of what I love about it. It's like you're bringing older readers to yours, you're bringing new readers to the old version. So that's a lot of the fun, I think.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sure. I'm always happy to talk about that.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, in Japanese like folklore, the inn is like such a important place, right, for all kinds of weird ghostly happenings to take place. So setting it there seems like a really smart move, especially since you wanted to bring ghosts into the conversation, into the story.
Yeah, the scenes inside the inn were so much fun to write and so creepy, and yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
So, and I don't know if people can see, but that's the cover of Amber's book there behind her. Isn't that a great cover?
Yeah.
So gorgeous.
Yeah,
So
and
what?
no, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I was actually very fortunate to be able to have a great deal of input on my cover, which I think is probably why I love it so much and I feel so invested in it. Because I worked with Camcat Books, which is a small traditional publisher here in the US. And yeah, they work hand in hand with the author. And so I was given like 9 different options. And then I picked the couple that I liked the best. And then we zoomed in on those. And we ended up doing like probably 5 drafts in the end where we went back and forth on everything from the font to the colors to which way things are flipped and just absolutely all the little details. So by the end, I'm just like, this is my dream cover. So it was a really amazing process. And I know a lot of folks don't get that. So I will point out that is sometimes one of the benefits of going with a smaller publisher is the amount of input that you get.
Yeah, I was just going to point that out. With a larger publisher, chances are you wouldn't have that same degree of input into your cover. With other things, yes, but not the cover. The cover is a kind of a weird, it's farmed out elsewhere. The authors usually have are consulted for cover artwork, but they don't really have a say in it. They certainly can't, you know, decide that they don't like a particular cover and it won't be used. That's usually up to the publisher if it's a big publisher. So like you say, it's a great, if you want to be like way more hands-on in the production of your book and the marketing of your book, a smaller press is happier to give the writer that freedom.
May I ask Christopher's question?
Yes, please.
Did you extensively read The Secret Garden to write the retelling?
It's actually interesting. Whenever I'm going to do retelling of an existing story, I will read it once and take a lot of notes. And if there's like a movie or some, like recent adaptations or any other little pieces of source material, I will like watch it once, take some notes, and then I completely set those aside and I will not pick it up again because I am afraid that I will get too invested in the original. And this is something that came up actually in my PhD with my supervisor. She had told me, Amber, there's too many things here where you're just on the fence. You need to either dive fully into this is your own story and you're ignoring what's in the original, or you need to lean heavy into what's in the original and just own it. There were too many times where I was like clinging to something from an original story, and I really just needed to let that go and be like, that just does not need to be in this story. But I did find that, like, did write down, like for The Secret Garden, I wrote down like all of the major kind of plot points, and I wrote down kind of the iconic moments, the scenes that if somebody who apparently like you, Melissa, who's a big fan of the original story, if they're like, well, if I don't see the moment when the uncle character comes out and sees the renewed gardens and has an epiphany, it's like there have to be these moments or else somebody feels like they didn't get the full experience. So I made sure that I had those in my mind. But then once I had those in my mind and I had kind of the idea of, my setting, my characters and things like that, I really did try my best to forget the original story because I'm like, that needs to be an inspiration. It's not a blueprint. So.
Right. And a related question in the chat is, did you have to get permission to do the retelling?
Not because, or no, because it is in the public domain. And that is an important distinction for folks who are considering doing retellings. And I don't know all the stats on how old something has to be right now. And I know it's different for the US versus the UK, but you can Google it, look it up online, find works that are in the public domain, which means that it's been yay number of years since the author's death or since the book was written, etc., which means that the book has entered into the cultural consciousness and anybody can use that work in any way. That's why if you go on Amazon, you can find 1 million different copies of The Secret Garden that people can just self-pub a version of The Secret Garden, put it out with a new cover, and they can sell it themselves. So you do have to be careful, though, if you're looking at older novels in particular to make sure it is public domain. Else then you are getting into weird copyright issues. And that's honestly, I've told people before, that's kind of the difference between retellings and fan fiction in some ways. Is it in the public domain? Do you have the legal right to do a version of that? And you'll notice too when something comes into the public domain, like The Great Gatsby came in like I think 2 years ago or something like that. So now you'll notice there's a lot of Great Gatsby retellings have come out in the past couple of years, and it's because there were people just waiting for that date. They're like, I'm going to jump on this train as soon as I can. So that's something you can do if you're interested in retellings. You will find lists that are like, you look up what's going to come out in 2027, what's going to come out in 2028, and maybe you'll be the first person to jump on that. You never know.
Winnie the Pooh came out. Remember that fell into the public domain and somebody immediately made a horror movie.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I mean, another thing, like you said, you don't want it to be in a retelling, you don't want it to be a blueprint, the original to be a blueprint. You want it to be an inspiration. And I feel like, generally speaking, that's probably a pretty good defense, that you were inspired by a book. And so you want to write something of your own that incorporates, themes or elements of it, but not in the sense that you're stealing it, or even that you're writing fanfic about it. It's just back there in whatever welter of miscellaneous artistic things have conspired to create something new in you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, for example, like Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is not in the public domain yet, but you will see a lot of books that, and you look for the careful wording of, inspired by, etc.
Right.
So so if you do choose something that's older, so, the author is no longer alive, but you're in that weird kind of gray territory. You do have to
Yeah.
be extremely careful with how you would word that. Because I actually have a Rebecca retelling that I am dying to do, but I'm like, I am holding out until it is a time that I can just full blown lean into it. So,
Yeah. And I mean, you also have to think about intellectual property. You have to think about the estate of a debt, of a deceased author. I know that when some time ago I was hired to write a book about Dracula. Now Dracula's in the public domain, but the movie with Bela Lugosi as Dracula from Universal Pictures, that's not in the public domain. That's still owned by Universal Pictures. So I was hired by Universal. Well, I was hired through Dark Horse to write the sequel to the Universal movie, which was a completely different thing because that was not yet in the public domain. And you just have to, you have to watch out for that kind of stuff and do your due diligence, as always, as a writer.
yeah, definitely.
So talk about, if you don't mind, your connection to Japan.
Yeah. I've always been interested in Japanese culture since I was very little. When I was young, my parents would take us to the Japanese tea garden in San Francisco and the Golden Gate Park, and it was one of my favorite places in the entire world. And then as I got older and I got to be a teenager, and that was around the time, like late 90s, when anime started really getting big in the US, and I became a huge anime nerd. And I started reading a lot of Japanese fiction. And as Haruki Murakami's books started becoming more available in the US, I started reading those. But then it really came to a head when I adopted my daughter from Japan, and that was that was 2011. So yeah, she's almost 14 now. And I traveled to Japan several times before that point. But when we adopted her, we said, okay, we're going to try to go back every 3 years so that we can kind of help her establish a level of comfort with her birth culture. And we've tried to learn Japanese. We do a lot of Japanese cooking. All my family does kendo, which is a Japanese bamboo sword martial art, like full contact. We wear armor that looks almost like samurai armor. It's very cool. And so my whole family does that and travel around regionally doing competitions and things. So it's kind of the thing that's just woven itself into my life at this point. And so when my imagination goes places, I often want to write things that are set in Japan. And so a lot of my characters too, just like with Secret Garden Unagi Inn, it's somebody who's at least somewhat familiar with Japan, as I am, but is then put into a situation where they are the outsider. And because that's one thing that I love about traveling to Japan is how I feel that culture shock so acutely. I mean, every time I go back, even if I've been there, I can't remember how many times I've been at this point, but every single time there's like this delicious sense of culture shock that never gets old. And it's that kind of vibe, I think, that I kind of strive for when I'm writing books that are set in Japan.
I mean, is that important to all of your work, the sense of being an outsider?
Um, I think so to some degree, because yeah, actually a book that I'm writing right now, or I'm editing right now, I had already done the first draft, does not involve Japan, but it's set in the south, in a small town in the south, which is reminiscent of a town that I used to live in, called Celebration, Florida, which is very much, if you've seen the Truman Show, it's not the town that was set in, but it is extremely similar to the town that is set in. So it's a very idyllic, very superficially perfect kind of, town. And the character that I have, the main character, is a woman from Missouri who ends up moving down there and there is a sense of, she's like, oh my gosh, I don't belong here. So now that you mention it, it does make me think I do like writing people who are stuck in a weird situation, and that they're not entirely comfortable with. But I think a lot of that is because then you get to examine things that an insider doesn't get to examine, because you don't notice the odd flora and fauna as you walk down the street if it's your own neighborhood. You notice it if you're in Japan. You notice it if you're suddenly in a completely different environment within your own country. So I think there is that element of novelty that allows you to really lean into description in a way that
Yeah.
would feel unnatural otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good way to world build for your readers for that reason. So is there a speculative element to the book you're working on now as well?
Yes. Yeah. Everything that I've ever written has been speculative in some way. Yeah. The one I'm writing right now, it's called The Forever Widows Book Club. And it's a woman who's recently widowed who goes down to this small town for a fresh start. And she gets invited to a book club, and she realizes that everybody in the book club is also a young widow. And she starts to realize, she's like, what have I gotten myself into here? And they're like, she's realizes they think she's one of them, and she doesn't know what that means. So it has kind of a Stepford Wives kind of vibe.
Wow,
But
that's great.
so yeah, without giving anything away, then yeah, the twist is indeed speculative and creepy. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. I think I would love to read that book. I mean, that
Awesome.
just sounds great.
Thanks.
All right, I'm going to grab another question out of the chat.
Sure.
I've heard it is absolutely necessary to hire a professional line and development editor prior to query or submission. What do you think about this? I've seen it can be quite expensive to hire those professionals for someone who is just starting out.
It can indeed be very expensive. I have been on the other end where I have edited folks' writing as a developmental and line editor, but no, it is not a requirement. What is, I hesitate to ever use the word requirement. What is highly recommended is that you get it to the most polished, most put together version that you possibly can. And that usually does mean stepping outside of yourself and reaching out for help. For me, I have never hired any kind of editor for my work. I have, however, found a group of writer friends who are willing to look over the work with me. I'm never somebody who will write a chapter, send it out, write a chapter. I have to write the whole thing, polish it a few times before anybody, even my husband, takes a look at it. But then I will send it out to some beta readers and I will get their feedback. And then I will edit it again. Then I'll send it out to some more readers, and then I will edit it again. And it has gone through that several times before I would consider querying it or sending it to any editors. I mean, excuse me, like publishing house editors, because you do need it to look as good as you possibly can. You do not want obvious typos. You do not want weird rambling sentences. So find yourself a group of people who you can critique with. And that's one of the benefits of being in a like MFA program for sure, is that you get to meet people who are in similar space as you and make those kinds of connections, because that kind of community is, I honestly believe that has made the biggest difference in my writing, is having folks that will help me. And then of course I make sure you reciprocate. Don't just hand your work out to people, say thanks, and then disappear. Be there for them when their book is ready for critiquing as well. So that's my advice.
Yeah.
Find somebody. It doesn't have to be somebody that you pay.
Thank you for saying that, because that's one of my soapboxes, and I'm going to climb up on it really quickly.
Yes.
Which is to say that everyone in the MFA or who hopes to be in the MFA, I mean, you're in a position for a very brief amount of time where you're surrounded by a lot of like-minded people from your tribe. They're people that care about writing and care about words. You speak the same language, or at least more than you will speak with random people that you run into on the street. So take advantage of those opportunities to form connections and, make bonds with people. Do workshops, do beta reads for people. You don't have to do it within the constraints of the MFA program. You can go outside. Nobody's going to stop you. And these can be relationships that are of importance to you throughout your career. So anyway, climbing back off the soapbox.
Amber, can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
How do you feel that poetry has affected your prose writing? And would you recommend that prose writers take a poetry course?
Actually, yes, I would highly recommend that. And I actually, in my undergrad degree, which ended up being psychology, I took a poetry creative writing class, and I really think it changed the way that I looked at writing. And I think it's because I am very much a proponent of reading your work out loud, and I think that comes from poetry. By the time that I have handed a book, like I said, I have to do several rounds before anybody gets their eyes on it. I will have read every single word of that book 3, 4 times out loud to myself, because I will, line by line, it has to sound good to me. And I have to watch out for the repetitions from, if I use the word floor above and I use the word door here, does that sound weird when it's said out loud? And also, just if you read it out loud, you can tell if you've lost the thread of your thought partway through that sentence, and by the end the sentence means something different, and you might not be able to recognize that if you're just seeing it with your eyeballs. But I do think that prose that sounds lovely is something that I really appreciate. And a lot of my favorite authors are ones that I will stop and read a line out loud because the sound of it is just so pleasing to my ears. And I think it's something really important to consider too, as audiobooks have become so much more part of the mainstream, because I've known that I've listened to the audiobooks of like older novels, and I just kind of cringe a little bit because I'm like, oh my gosh, nobody thought this was going to be read out loud into somebody's ears, and I can tell. So keep that in mind, that you want your words to sound nice, because hopefully someday people will be listening to your audiobook and they will notice if, you have weird repetitions or things don't quite make sense audibly where they would visually.
Yeah, here's a great comment from Violet in the chat. I use the read aloud tool and listen to it being read because I find I will miss things if I'm reading it.
That's true. That is also very true. Is that, like, your eye will skip over if you have a "the" at the end of a line, and then there's another "the" at the beginning of the next line. If you have weird issues like that, but a robot reading to you is going to be like the potato, whatever. So that can be very helpful. Yeah, especially for catching errors and things. But I do think that I have a bit of a superpower of being able to read only what is on the page and precisely what is on the page. Something that drives me nuts with I've got 2 teenagers and helping them with homework, and I'll have them read out loud. I'm like, read what's actually on the page there. That is not, that's in your head. That is not on the page.
Right.
So it might be something that you get better with, experience, but I do think my superpower is being able to read out loud.
I wish I had that superpower. Melissa, do you read your work out loud?
Exactly as Amber is describing. We have the same process.
Excellent.
And for the first time ever, I recorded an audiobook of one of my books under contract last month. I was so glad I had that practice.
Oh, that's very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's so cool. When is that coming out?
The audiobook, it should be out on June 3rd.
Oh my gosh, that's so soon.
It was kind of intimidating.
Yeah, I'm sure you did a great job.
I don't know. We'll find out. I learned that you should not have fruit-scented candles in the room where you're reading.
Why is that?
Congestion and coughing.
Oh no.
Okay. Wow. Well, who knew?
I know. I have another question for you, Amber.
Sure.
One of my favorite fiction writers is Amy Bloom, who actually writes nonfiction now too, and also Chris Crutcher, the YA author. Both of these authors have degrees in psychology and have been practicing psychologists. I wondered what advantages your psychology undergrad degree gives you when you're crafting characters and relationships.
That is a good question. I definitely think that, and I mentioned this if I ever see students who have undergrads in psychology, I think it does give you a very nice basis for understanding humanity, just even broadly speaking. I imagine I would think the same also with like a sociology degree, philosophy, anything where you have to think about humans and how we view the world. because I mean, and also a lot of the times people go into psychology because they are fascinated by human nature and why humans do things and motivation and everything that goes on in the human brain. So that kind of curiosity, I think, goes hand in hand a lot of times with authors. I have a surprising number of author friends who I know who have studied some kind of psychology at some point, and I think that is why. So yeah, so anybody who hasn't gone through very much psychology, coursework or anything, be open to just picking up some, even if it's just like a pop science psychology book or self-help books or anything. You will get insights and you will think, oh my gosh, that sounds kind of like this character that I'm thinking about writing. Do a bit of research onto what that type of personality is like, and it can definitely help you flesh out characters, I think.
And I
Thank
mean,
you.
not to draw like a straight line between these things, but I think if you are in therapy yourself or have been in therapy yourself, you can gain some tools that can be useful to you in thinking about your characters, right?
Oh,
You can
very cool. Yeah.
sort of put them into therapy. Maybe they need it.
Oh, there's a good question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Why don't you grab it?
I will. Lee Brown, one of the things pointed out in the description of this chat is the fact that you have a PhD in creative writing. What goes into the PhD versus the MFA?
Well, it's interesting because my PhD was actually done in the UK. So it was done in Cambridge, England. And the PhDs in England are done a little bit differently than they are here in the US because I did look at US degrees and I looked at English degrees. I chose the UK degree because it is a research-based degree, which means that I did not have coursework. It was not broken down into individual classes. It is more of a kind of, you work very closely with your mentors to work on a very long dissertation and to work on I did have to have an entire polished novel as part of my PhD program. And it was done primarily via distance because I live in Kansas, but I did have to go over several times to do like individual kind of workshops and meet with my mentors and stuff like that. But the entire process, yeah, was quite different than anything I'd experienced in part of a US. I think that the American PhDs are a little bit more similar to the MFA program, but my main understanding that I've had it explained to me is that with the PhD programs, you are expected to come to the table with your ideas pretty much fleshed out. Like I had to, when I was applying for the PhD program, I had to know what my thesis was going to be about. I had to know what my book was going to be about. I had to have a proposal of this is the project that I want to work on. And I had to identify which professors at the university would be willing to work with me, talk to them, get their buy-in that they would be willing to basically be my mentor before I could even take my first step into the program. So whereas I feel like the MFAs are way more about helping you figure out your voice, helping you figure out where you want to be as a writer, what you want to write for your final project. That it's a lot more of that's part of the process of the degree as compared to you're coming in, hitting the ground running because you already are self-directed and know exactly what you're doing. And also the end game, I mean, I remember when I applied for the PhD and when the professors was like, well, why do you want this PhD? And I said, well, I had already been teaching for many years at that point in other fields because I have a weird academic background. And I said, but I want to really focus on my writing. So I want a degree that will not make me have to stop writing because I have to completely do this coursework over here. So I wanted something that would synergize with my novel writing. And I wanted to be able to teach creative writing. And they said, well, it's really hard to get into teaching creative writing. I said, I know how hard it is to get a teaching job. Don't worry. And they're like, okay. But I do think that having the PhD really has opened up a lot of doors in terms of being able to teach at the master's level. I do see a lot of job openings that prefer a terminal degree, and MFA is technically terminal in a lot of ways, but I do think I get a little bit of a step up from having that PhD and being in that academic environment where the other colleagues, if you're teaching a science field, they expect you to have a PhD or So there definitely are differences, but I think a lot of it does come down to the attitude of what you're walking in there with. But also at the time, I already had 2 master's degrees, and a third one seemed a bit silly. So I'm like, I better just go up another level, quite honestly. So
I'm going to grab another one out of the chat. How averse are UK agents and publishers to working with first-time authors from the US?
well, my experience is that they've all been very open to it. It depends on the agency. Sometimes I have looked up UK agencies and they will have a note actually in their submissions page that's if you are in the US, you are probably better served by an American agent. And I'm like, okay, I won't submit to you. But all the rest have all been very open to working worldwide, quite honestly. And you might find that the UK agents are not surprisingly, more UK focused. Like my most recent agent, he would only submit to the UK, and then they had an in-house person who would send to the US. But it ended up that I wasn't able to get a UK deal, and so it never got sent to the US, which was a bit of a downer. So that wasn't the case with my first agent, though. So it really is a case-by-case situation. But I would just say don't rule out agents in other countries at all. Like I'm actually in talks with a Canadian agent. So there are agents in other countries, and they are very aware of the American market for sure. So give it a shot.
Yeah. I mean, you would almost think that there would be opportunities to say, like, I'm going to have one agent for America, I'm going to have another agent for the UK, but it never quite works out that way.
I do know some folks who have multiple agents, but you really do have to have a primary. You have to decide who the primary is and who gets to control. Because then it's like, okay, well, what happens when you want the German rights? Which of you guys gets to get that slice of the pie? So there's a lot of negotiating.
There'll be like a primary agent, like my agent, my US agent will have like a subsidiary UK agent that works on his behalf. And so they will handle my book in the UK, for example.
Yeah, and that is the most common way of handling it.
All right, we're kind of coming to the end of our chat. It's gone very quickly, and before we do, though, I wanted to ask you about techno-animism is also mentioned in your biography. I was just intrigued by that word and the concept of it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So brief background. So my PhD thesis was about men who lose their shadows from Hans Christian Andersen to Haruki Murakami. So I did a retelling of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale, The Shadow, which is not terribly well known. And I set that in near future Japan. And in The Shadow, it's about a man who sends his shadow away, and the shadow ends up coming back years later, like as a fully formed human, and kind of wants to take over the original man's life. Basic premise. And so in mine, it's a man in Japan, and he sends his shadow away, and it comes back, and it wants to take over his life. But since it's set in the future, we have all these other elements of like there's a character that gets mentioned who is basically like an android, right? So it's very humanoid looking, but is entirely artificial intelligence. And the shadow accidentally falls in love with this person, not realizing that they're not human. And once they find out, they're like, oh, shoot, neither of us are really fully human, so we can't actually, we can't open bank accounts. We have no IDs. So it kind of turned into this idea that then the shadow is basically the equivalent of an AI because they both lack the basic human rights to be able to function in a society. And so the techno-animism is the idea that inanimate objects, specifically technology, so we're talking about robots, we're talking about vacuum cleaners, absolutely anything, can have a soul and can have the same kind of base humanity that humans have. And so I kind of extrapolated that, and that was a lot of what my the dissertation, the thesis, part of the critical element was talking about why I chose to set that in near future Japan, because the Japanese are way more accepting of robots and things having souls and minds and personalities, and in holograms. I love holograms, the whole concept of holograms. So I have a lot of hologram characters, things like that. Because I find that whole concept very fascinating. And it comes from the fact that, yeah, the Japanese are not afraid of robots in the same way that Americans have, partially because of, we have the Terminator, and they have things like Astro Boy, who was like this hero from like the
Yeah,
early
I love
60s.
Astro Boy.
Yeah. And it sets a tone for how do you feel about, robots who are walking around. It's like, are they our friends or are they the enemy who are going to come kill us? So that kind of divide in perspective really kind of fueled my decision to have the shadow story set in near future Japan. And because the attitudes towards both the AI character, but then also, yeah, the shadow, and being like, well, you don't have to be 100% human in order to be human and have rights. And yeah, so it was very fun research, I will say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by the idea. I mean, you've described briefly a couple of the books that you've written that haven't been published. These are great ideas. So, I mean, do you feel like you're going to come back to these books at some point?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, actually, I made a list before I sat down for this interview, and I've written 9 novels that I have written and polished and done everything for. And of course, I've only published one so far. I do, but they're never dead. Is kind of the short answer there. Like one that I have that's called The Haunted Woman, I actually did get an offer on from my debut publisher. I got an offer last year, and then while my agent was in contract negotiations with it, the CEO of the company unfortunately died.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so then the entire company was, kind of up in the air at that point. They didn't know what was going to happen to it. And they ended up having to back out of the contract, and they ended up selling the company. But I heard more recently that the company was bought by Baker and Taylor, which is like a large distributing company.
Yeah.
And so that's coming back, and they're starting to buy books again. So it's the kind of thing. So it's possible that that could be revived. So the books are never dead. And I love the fact that I have all these books in my back pocket, because then if I ever do, next time I get a book contract and if like they need a book too, I'll be like, hey, guess what? I have
Right.
some options. So
Right. Would you feel like you needed to go back in and revise those books, or do you think that I mean, because you've probably evolved as a writer since you wrote some of them.
absolutely. Oh yeah, some of them I think I would be kind of embarrassed. Like my very first book, I that's probably never seeing the light of day.
Yeah.
The second book, the fake Irish folktale one, I actually did at one point trim it down to a novella, and I'm thinking about trying to have it find new life as a novella, which is always an option too. If you can't sell it in one format, think, okay,
Yeah.
well, it could find new life in a different way. So yeah, it's writing. My writing has changed quite a bit over the years. So they're all learning experiences, though, even if they never see the light of day.
Right. Yeah, nothing's lost, right?
Yep.
Melissa, do you have any last questions?
Oh, I asked all of them.
You asked all the questions.
No, I didn't ask all the questions. I have one more.
Okay.
Amber, do you have a favorite place to publish short fairy tale retellings? A
Oh
favorite
gosh.
literary journal, something like that?
Well, I'm a big fan of flash fiction. That has been a lot of what I've written before. Flash fiction online is a personal favorite of mine, and I was actually a reader for them for years, and I learned so much about flash fiction that way. Everybody, if you want to learn how to write in a certain medium, go be like a slush reader for that publication for a while, and you will learn so much about what to do and what not to do. And then, what is the name of the everyday fiction? They literally put out a story every day, and I've had several of my pieces published with them, and it's a great site because you can get feedback also. Like it's a very active community. People will leave comments, very nice comments. I've never had anybody be super rude, which is nice. But yeah, that's a good one as well. They're not fairy tale specific. I know that there are publications out there, but I tend to go for more of just the broad ones in general.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, with that, I'm going to have to bring our Wireside Chat to a close, unfortunately. I want to thank you, Amber, so much for joining us and
Yeah,
chatting
thanks.
about your writing and fairy tales and techno-animism and cool stuff like that. I'm really thrilled and excited about your new novel, and I hope you publish it and goes on to great success.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Amber.
And thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.